is to get the extension of the contract date for closing date. And here we have the situation, a seller says, I'm not extending it. When a seller says to a buyer, I don't care that your lender didn't get the docs there, I'm not extending the closing date. We have nuances in our real estate contracts, but basically, my response is, your buyer needs to seek legal help.
Yeah, this is an area where we repeatedly see problems, and the problem is that unless there's some provision that says that closing date is of the essence, or some special provision, the courts are going to tend to say we're going to allow a reasonable time for the transaction to close. If there's some problem that's beyond the control of either the parties, some lien they didn't know about, there's 1,000 different ways the closing needs to be delayed. When you have multiple parties bidding for the same properties, like you have more and more these days in this market, that can be a really tricky situation. And so, what is a reasonable time? Who decides what the reasonable time is? A judge or a jury. That's the person who gets to decide that. And so it's really a good practice to try to avoid getting into that never land of reasonable time. Get your amendment, written amendment, extending the closing date. If there's any problem at all with getting that agreement, with extending the closing date, you need to immediately, your client needs to immediately talk to the lawyer. Because at that point, the path that's been laid out for you to keep you out of trouble, that's no longer relevant. You're in an area where there needs to be an attorney involved, and there's probably going to be a dispute, and very well may be a lawsuit. And that's just the way it is. This is a gray area, a fuzzy area that the real estate rules are not going to help.
Okay, Mark?
Does not the contract say, I've heard this, I've never actually read it, Marilyn, but I think it
Somebody practicing law that I hear?
Time is of the essence for the purposes of all days. Does it not say that in the
It does not say that. There's only two places that
Repeat
time
the
is
question.
of. He's asking, isn't it stated in the contract about all dates or time is of the essence? It is absolutely not true. It's in paragraph 23, performance for an option. In other words, when the option fee must be given, time is of the essence. And the other one is in the third-party financing credit approval in the first paragraph. It states that performance for the buyer to give to the seller notification that they are terminating the contract pursuant to third party has to be done within those number of days. It can never be extended.
Can we add time is of the essence in the special provision?
You will not do that because you're not an attorney. Yeah.
That's the catch-22.
That is the catch-22. He's absolutely right. Their attorney can, but not you.
Because the other element to adding that in the provisions is if it conflicts with what's in the contract, you now have a problem. Because you have phrases in the main portion of the contract that says time isn't of the essence, you have time sensitivity, and then you have a provision that says time is of the essence, so that it doesn't matter what's in the written.
Says time is not of the essence?
It does not, but if you add it in the provisions, it now conflicts with what's in the main contract.
Absolutely.
You now have two sections of a contract that conflict with one another.
Correct.
You'd have to limit the whole...
That's why you need an attorney to do it.
And I'm going to tell you that's exactly right, because anything you write in special provisions, if you conflict with what's in the contract, you are going to go down as the agent. Only an attorney who can draft the appropriate addendum for the contract, and here's why I know this, because I've shown them to Steve too, the attorney will write, this supersedes any language that is found in the contract that this is attached to. Relocation companies do this.
This replaces
Bank
paragraph.
foreclosures, that's right. And they do it because they've got a huge group of attorneys that do nothing but draft documents that's only going to protect their client. So again, you're not able to write anything like that because it directly conflicts with almost every paragraph in the contract.
We have one right now. We have a direct complaint, Mark, for one of our top agents, actually the top agent in San Antonio. And she represents her clients really well. She's a high-level fiduciary. But she put some language in the paragraph that contradicts the contract as a whole. to protect her client's interest. Looking at it, looks very harmless. It looks like she really did the best job for her seller, and I would have said, I applaud her. But because the way she wrote it, and it was her representation and her influence and her direction, now that she's going to be taken, probably most likely, and the Trek investigators found out that came from her specifically, they considered that practicing law. And now she's in probably most likely she will be fined. Question is how much. And she really did it. The old saying, no good deed goes unpunished. And she's myth. We're upset about it. I'm upset. But she really probably should not have given that advice by putting that language in the special provisions, because she's not an attorney, and she did represent the client like an attorney would. And so what's really going to find her is not a lawsuit or a civil matter, it's going to be Trek. Because they're going to slap her hand for it. You're not supposed to do that.
If the seller instructs you to write time is of the essence and special provision, you have an email to them instructing you to do so.
No, you would have to send an email back to them and say, you need to consult with your attorney and have your attorney direct and provide anything.
It is never a defense that your client told you to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It is not a viable defense. If you're breaking the law or you're breaking Trek regulations, that is not an acceptable defense.
And
that's like saying, well, my wife told me to speed, you cops, or you give her the ticket. It doesn't work that way.
No, it does not work that way. And you know that it is contrary. For instance, somebody wants to always do a non-refundable earnest money. Does it state that anywhere in the contract?
Nope. Yes.
It states that earnest money can be refunded if a buyer performs this way. Earnest money could be refunded if the buyer performs this way. But it absolutely does not say that it's non-refundable, ever. And that's the problem when you get into these things where sellers want protection. They hired you to be the real estate agent, not to provide them legal advice, but you absolutely know the paragraphs in this contract, and you cannot allow a party to write anything in special provisions that conflicts. Their attorney would have to be the one who could have directed advice. And most of the time we get the attorneys involved, and it does work out the best interest. Yes?
Well, I'm a new agent, so it's look at it from that perspective. But I was married to a real estate attorney who in every house, yeah, me too. In every house, he would take the contract and just tear it up. But I know other people, the other attorneys, that kind of edited as well. Now, if I say no, but they're the ones doing it, and they're signing at the bottom of it,
The attorney,
themselves.
that's fine. Attorneys are allowed to represent themselves, and they're giving themselves legal advice, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Well,
but that's okay. The unfortunate part of your element, you're going to present that contract that's been slashed and dashed and all that to another party, and now the other party has to get an attorney to interpret all those slashes.
That's the other side of it. If you're the agent that receives that offer from a slashed up from an attorney, your first words of advice are, they've changed the contract, I advise you to get this reviewed by an attorney.
It's about promulgating contracts being modified.
Yes, exactly, and that's the difference on that.
Marilyn, what should go in special provisions?
Okay, he has the perfect example. What should go in special provisions? Well, it says right there that material facts can be presented from one party to another. In other words, it could be that a buyer agent is related to buyer. It only covers not only Article 4 of the Code of Ethics that we're required to do that, but it's a material fact of information giving to the other party. The other thing would be, in our contract and addendum, it doesn't give us any provision to put the seller on notice that, look, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer want a final walkthrough through the property prior to going to the title company accepting it. And it's a consideration. While paragraph 7H talks about inspections at reasonable times, I have found as a real estate agent, if my sellers knew that somebody's going to walk through the property 24 hours before closing, it puts in the mindset that, you know, it better be in a condition that they'd be willing to be very happy about it before they walk out and go to the title company. So it's a consideration that should be done. Many times we have language that's provided by relocation companies, bank foreclosures, and their attorneys through their representative have said this must be in the contract. You must add this in special provisions. Again, that's coming from the attorneys that represent the other party to them. I have seen some contracts that say that the option period ends on the last day of the option period at 5 p.m. What time does that option period end? 11:59 p.m. And it is a conveyance of a request at this point to the other party. If the other party says, yes, I agree that the option period, instead of it ending at 11:59, even though it's not hard-coded in the contract, we know that's when it ends, they want it to end at 5 p.m. on that day. If both buyer and seller are willing to accept it, it's okay, isn't it, Steve? There you go. So you see the difference. It's not that the parties are writing anything that's going to change the significant terms of the language that is provided in the contract, but it could be identification much like the time element on the option. Yes, ma'am.
We'll get to you. We'll get to you. She's obviously next.
On a backup offer, I would say that from what you told me, I would say that the seller is exposing himself to something that he needs to go to an attorney before he signs a backup offer.
Well, you can call and talk to me later about that. We'll talk about that. Okay. Yes, please.
I forgot.
Dilson.
No, seriously. Back a couple of statements ago, when you guys were talking about if the buyer wants to terminate, the seller wants to terminate the deal because you don't want to accept the extension from the buyer still can, am I correct, the buyer can still lock it up, because if the buyer don't release the earnings money, you're still in the contract with them.
She was saying that if the seller refuses to extend the closing date,
Yes, that's
and the buyer has legal remedies that they can do, they would have to seek the advice of an attorney to assist them in facilitating that. At that point, you are getting direction from the attorney. This last time, this issue that we had, the attorney at 11 something at night, he sent an email and he says, you do what the seller has requested you do. Because earlier in the day, I talked to the attorney and I said, we're not going to do anything until we get direction directly from you in writing.
So Marilyn, we're mentioning attorneys a lot. Are there a list of attorneys you'd like us to go through?
Oh, Michael, this is perfect.
Here's that softball for you.
I know. Here's the thing, and Craig, and we've come up with this in our risk management meetings that we have. If you've got a client who says, can you give me a recommendation of a real estate attorney, you need to call me. We have attorneys who represent our interest only, that if there's a conflict, Steve wouldn't be able to do it, but he could advise the attorney that it would be referred to, much like we do referrals. So again, we don't want you to go over there and say, these are my friends or these are my 3 attorneys. They have to be real estate attorneys. In other words, somebody who's proficient in the nuances of residential contracts. Because some of the attorneys out there, they know contracts, but they don't know the nuances, like what Steve mentioned about acceptance, withdrawal, all these types of things that go on.
You just want to make sure those attorneys aren't suing you in other matters.
That's the best point, because that's exactly what has happened. We had agents going to attorneys, referring those clients to an attorney who is in an active lawsuit with our market center. Yeah, that won't work. Yes, ma'am.
I'm starting to see a lot in special provisions. Honestly, I don't think from our office, but where they're starting to put for the buyers that they can change their financing, not necessarily the terms. I can't remember the wording, but I've seen it now.
Yeah, and I have. Okay, the question was, she sees in special provisions that buyer has the ability to change financing without affecting the contract and blah blah blah. Okay, the buyer is saying they can change financing terms. Personally, I don't agree with that. You never put anything in that contract about the future, ever. It is about the here and now. It is not about trying to get another party to say, I'll accept that, the appraisal doesn't come in, I'll lower it. You don't do that. You're only asked to do that when? At the appropriate time in the contract in the form of an amendment. And so I have just stopped beating typing in all of the words saying, please don't put that anymore in special provisions, all of this, because it's really not appropriate. You're only going to do what you're supposed to do at the right time in the transaction. And if you upload any more amendments to the listing that are already signed by the seller and they're blank, you better be running. Because I'm coming for you. Okay, we have a lot of questions here.
In a loving way, of course.
In a very loving way.
We have a lot of new agents with us that don't know you there.
No, and the new agents that have come up to me already, that have called me and talked to me, you know that I will always take your calls. I am there for you. I am there to help you. Don't do it after all parties sign something. You know, let's get that cleared up beforehand. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
What about, we having that now with all the way the market is, when the client says, this offer is only good for 24 hours?
I think she says this offer is only good for 24 hours. Here's my problem. When does the 24-hour start? It's just like the executed dates that aren't on the contract. So you're going to put this offer is, valid to 5 p.m. on May 14th. Do you see when I say don't put 24 hours? Because you know what? We don't know when 24 hours begins.
But it's in special provision.
It goes in special provisions because the buyer is conveying a material fact to the seller and wants the seller to acknowledge it.
So let's expand on that, because I know this is going to be some of the hands that are popping up. What about saying we will be reviewing all offers at this period of time?
I don't think the contract is the place for we'll be reviewing all offers. That is communication that should go out from the seller's invitation to buyer to submit a new offer. The seller can state at such and such time that they will be considering all offers and then sign it. Yes, sir.
But tell one, tell all.
Oh, yeah, it has to be all.
Tell one, tell all. So you can't just say that to one party, not tell the other. If that's a disadvantage to one of the party, then that's unfair, and we're now held liable.
Yeah.
What about MLS?
MLS? Well, MLS is our ability. We have an agent remarks section, and it is our ability to communicate information to the other party that could be important prior to submission of an offer or showings and that type of thing. So I think at that point it is appropriate. Yes, Mark?
Well, we're trying to protect our sellers nowadays because appraisals are not coming in.
Right.
Okay? And so
They're not coming in, or they're coming in
they're
low?
not appraising.
They're not
They're not
appraising.
appraising.
We do have big issues with appraisal. We're getting over list price and they're not appraising.
Those
There
darn
are many buyers that are willing to pay those prices.
Right.
And so, and then some buyers are putting significant amounts of cash down where the appraisal is not as much of an issue and that the lender would still lend the money despite the value of the appraisal. So would it be appropriate to put something in the special provisions that stated as such that as long as the appraisal came within X percentage of the price, contract cannot be terminated by buyer due to appraisal?
No, that's it. He talked about, can something go in special provision about appraisals? If the appraisal exceeds 3% or doesn't exceed 3%, the buyer doesn't have the right to terminate. In other words, you're trying to change the terms that are provided in paragraph 4 of the contract. No, that is a conflict to the language that's already in the contract. That's what we're trying to tell you. You do not have the luxury of doing that. An attorney would have to draft an addendum that would speak to every issue possible because our contracts have conflicting information. And only through attorneys could that be done. You will not be able to do that.
Because you could have an environment where it appraises low and you write that addendum and it's not complete, but yet now the repair request is another $30,000. And then that puts that out of people not wanting to do it, but it's not addressed in the addendum.
Well, they can terminate for reasons of
But it's not all addressed in the one line of just addressing the appraisal.
And
It
again,
puts things in conflict.
and it conflicts with our contracts as provided. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, is there a way to accomplish that goal that Mark is talking about?
Yes, that party would get their real estate attorney to draft an addendum that the other party would have to agree to in a part of the contract.
Okay,
That's
thank
the
you.
only way.
party would have to use an attorney.
Pardon me?
And then the other party would have to use an attorney.
Absolutely, because that addendum was written by an attorney.
Well,
and it's
hold on. But Michael, one second. We can't advise the other client to or not to have an attorney. We can't tell the other party we're going to get an attorney because we have an attorney. I mean, that's that's going way too
But
far.
Maryland's been clear, or at least it sounds to me that Maryland's been clear that if we receive a contract that has been striked by an attorney,
Correct.
that we advise our client to consult.
Advise.
Absolutely.
We can't make.
Yeah, but we do advise.
We advise.
We advise them in writing,
Yes,
and if they
advice.
choose not to do it, they choose
Well,
not
yeah.
to do it.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes.
Yeah.
You know the answer. We've advised. That's what best we can do.
Marilyn, can we
And I
put
think
on
if your client is using a lawyer, you probably have a duty to inform the other side that you're using an attorney.
Yeah. So I think that's
You don't advise
it's the
them,
win-win. You got
but
to
you have to inform them that you have an attorney.
And most of the term, there is a place in the contract for the attorney's information to be that represents the party. And not only that, the good attorneys, they actually put it on the addendum. In other words, they're taking signature and authority over having presented this addendum.
Folks, don't be frustrated. I see the frustration in your faces, and okay, it has to be this way. There's not absolutes. We can't force your client to do certain things. We can't. However, we are a representative to the client's actions. So if the client does certain things, Mark or Michael, that we know rightfully could harm the brokerage or harm your career and your reputation, then you just do us a favor and let us know what's going on. Don't use the additive, well, they just did what they did, and that's, like we said, the spouse is driving 80, well, it was her fault. You're just as fault too because you're driving with her. So I guess what it boils down to is take ownership and be a responsible party, like if you were the owner of the company, because you're just as much risk as I am. That's all. It's managed risk.
Craig, could the brokerage at least maybe consider coming up with an addendum to help the agents and help serve our sellers?
Well, because
by coming up with an addendum that says something about an appraisal.
Well, here's the thing. Bo Blackburn's a friend like Steve, and he's on the broker lawyer committee for Texas Real Estate Commission. So he's the one that helps look and draft the promulgated forms that you and I use. And believe me, I have sat over beer drinking with this guy, and I have told him I think this form is so stupid. And why don't we do it like other states do it? Because my practice is real estate in a different state in Memphis. Tennessee's got I believe they have a better contract than Texas does. And I would love to make some of those changes. But the complexities of every single transaction are taken into consideration when they do these promulgated forms. And I know there is somewhat of a neutrality, it's almost like they're vanilla. And I'm sorry that's the way it is. I didn't make the rules. I'm just trying to follow them. So as a broker, we take a lot of risk when you start putting certain language.
I don't want to put language.
No, I know that.
That's not what I was asking.
But would you say that the appraisal issue?
No, I was asking, could the broker come up with an
I understand.
That
That's not a one-sided.
But it's not a one-sided.
And not even
we wouldn't
that.
have to.
I don't think Mark is asking for a one-size-fits-all. All I think Mark is asking is for us to bring it up.
And you know who would have to interpret that document and explain it to the client?
all the liabilities
Not the
fall right
agent.
on them.
The agent could never explain that. The attorney
What
has
about
to
these
explain that.
relocation addendums we're trying to get?
Let me tell you, the buyers know that if they sign that, and a lot of attorneys are behind all those relocation documents. That's the risk that buyer takes. These are not transactions for everybody when they are involved with that.
Marilyn, the appraisal, can you put in special provisions if the house does not appraise, then we can either renegotiate or the earnest money
No.
be released?
Trek brought that out.
What can we put?
I'm going to tell you, it is already in paragraph 4.
I know, but
Anything else will be, no, if you put that in there, it's a violation of Trek. They addressed that 3 years ago in our contracts, and they said the reason we added appraisal and underwriting requirements in paragraph 4A1 was because the agents were practicing law and they had the risk of going to jail. It is not a fine and lose your license. You will go to jail.
Yeah, but let me ask a question, because what if they're past the finance period? Because like on this one contract, they want to make the finance period so short, and if the house doesn't appraise, my client doesn't want to be out $20,000.
You don't understand the contract because appraisal is property approval only. Third party is only individual approval. So again, we're not going to go and beat this dead horse anymore.
And guys, we are tight on time
we
there.
are very tight on time.
We got to get through some material because I've got your quiz here.
Yeah.
That not a whole lot on that last piece.
Okay. Real quick, Greg, I want you to talk about procuring cause. In a nutshell, explain to them what procuring cause is.
Actually, I think Steve would probably do a much better job than me. Let's just face it, folks. Procuring cause has a lot more to do than just a buyer representation agreement. Actually, Marilyn has represented me and my agents on several transactions recently in which we actually assisted buyers at one time in the past in which we carried out services and or certain duties as an active real estate licensee would do. In turn, that buyer found the property that we procured based on MLS findings, IDX, search savers, whatever. We found the property. We can surely show that. The buyer went out, purchased the property from a different agent. We went back later to find out, after closing, who the other agent was in the brokerage. We have filed a procuring cause case against them, taken it to TAR. We have demanded those commissions, and we win every single one. Why? Because procuring cause has nothing to do with buyer representation. It's that's a very small part of it. And I'll let Steve explain this. At the end of the day, a procuring cause has a lot to do with the fact that you procure that purchaser, the property in which they purchased. I'm not saying don't use a buyer rep. What I'm just trying to tell you is if you are working with a buyer right now that has been exposed to a property by a different licensee with a different brokerage, you do run the risk that if that property closes and they come after us, the brokerage, most likely you'll be giving that money back. Every time. And because TAR, the folks that handle those, know procuring causes very well and the way it's structured, the way it's defined. And I'm telling you right now, you need to start asking the question, if you are working with buyers, have you seen this property before? How did you come to see this property? And are you working with another realtor in the business? A licensed agent, a licensed brokerage. And yes, folks, you should be getting a buyer representation agreement.
Yeah, and get the answer to that question in writing if at all possible. So.
You mean as far as confirmation that they've not seen that in the property?
Right.
Because every time, I mean, I'm going to tell you something. I know Marilyn seems to be a hard ass right now, right? I kind of see that a little bit. I feel it a little bit. But I love her for doing this. But and I'm probably a little softer than her this side. But I'll say this: when you go to battle, I'll guarantee you want her and this guy over here on your team. Because every time I've gone I don't want to be on the other side, barreling down with her on procuring cause, because she wins every single one of them we've been on. So as an agent here at the company, every time we protected your interests, you're earning that commission. We want to make sure you get it. So
I don't understand.
Why? Why don't you understand?
I don't understand this procuring cause.
Bottom line is, if you have a situation where you showed a buyer a home, the buyer went out to, say you made him aware of a certain property. Later that buyer went out and you found out that buyer went and bought that property from another broker. Procuring cause, you fall into that category where you actually procured that buyer for that property. You have a possible claim against the other brokerage for commission.
Always document.
It's a dispute between two brokers as to who should receive the commission. And procuring cause basically says that the broker who was responsible and did the work and brought the people to the transaction and made it happen, that's generally the broker who's entitled to
Doesn't, like I said, we've won them where we procured it and the other brokerage had a buyer representation agreement.
Okay.
We've still won them.
So if we show the property yesterday and we got a lead from HAR and it says, are you working with an agent? And they said, no. You know, we call, how are you doing this? You working with anybody? No. Showing assistant shows them, no, we're not working with another agent. Shows the house, love the house, working with another agent. I'm just out doing my agent's job.
It's happened.
So then that would be cause for us if she comes back and wants to purchase this home?
There's no definitive answer on it. I mean, you go to, what happens is you go to a TAR hearing. And if they find it, they find that it's the findings of several. How many people are 4? Is it 3? There's 4 people who will make that decision.
So, but it's my listing. If I see a contract come through with XYZ person and I know who she is, you get my phone call.
Doesn't mean you cannot you should not do any type of tortious interference with that current contract. If you do that, then there's much more risk involved, and I'm sure Steve can really get into that. I mean, you can't change the forward progress of that contract, regardless of whoever's involved in it. But you probably should notify all parties.
Don't worry, I will.
All right, hey guys, who would like me to go through the questions on the test? All right.
Michael.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, Andrew.
Procuring cause. If somebody, if a buyer calls you and says, I found this property on the internet, can you show it to me? And you have a buyer's representation agreement, right?
Yes.
And you show them the property, and at that moment they say, well, I'm going to think about it. And then you don't hear from them, and a month later you find out that they bought it with another agent.
They're entitled to say, for example, you know, we didn't really like that realtor. We really didn't click. We're gonna go look at some other properties. We're gonna go hire some other realtor, and that realtor does the work. If there's a cessation, if there's a break in the chain of causation, then probably that second broker is going to be the one that receives the commission, even though you did a little bit of work.
It's not hard to pass.
Yeah, it's definitely not.
What did you both have buyer agreements?
Buyer agreements don't matter.
Not in procuring costs.
This is between two brokers.
Exactly.
But like he said, but it was really important what he said. He says if there is activities that occur after with the next broker over a sustained period of time, most likely the first person who procured it loses some of that, might lose some of those credible details or actions to be able to allow themselves to receive procuring costs.
To show procuring cause in general, you need to show a continuous representation that results in the transaction being finalized. If there's a break, the clients decide they don't like you, or for whatever reason they go hire somebody else, and that other broker does the work, then probably you're not going to be entitled to the commission. But it's very fuzzy. It's a multivariate factor analysis, and the arbitrators make a decision based on how they feel and what they had for breakfast that day.
Steve, and you guys, real quickly. The one thing that we got out of the last one we did in San Antonio was when the best way to avoid lawsuits. That was the number one thing that we talked about was when they like you, and when they definitely don't like you.
Number one way to prevent, win, or defend lawsuits is documentation. A well-documented file is your number one way. Emails, phone logs, homes you look into. Number one way to prevent, defend, or win lawsuits is a well-documented file. Lawsuits are not won by who's right and who's wrong. They're not one who has the best attorney. They're not won by who has the most money. They are won by who has the most evidence, period. Okay? Number two way to prevent lawsuits is outstanding customer service. People don't sue people when they have a good experience. They call you first to give you the opportunity to fix it. They call you instead of calling their attorney. The number three way is recommendation of a home warranty. And the number four way is avoiding high-risk transactions.
And the next one, I think, is you don't necessarily have to represent everybody who walks through the door.
Say no.
You need to choose your clients just the same as they choose you.
Don't get commission right.
Can you explain the high-risk transaction? What that is?
Contract for deed.
You guys are already upset enough. I don't know if I want to answer this, but high-risk transactions. Sorry, Stephen. Are you working with a plaintiff's attorney?
No.
That's a high-risk transaction. That's a highly litigious, high-risk transaction. Are you representing? Are you an exclusive listing agent for a builder in a development? I'm not saying don't do it, but you have to understand that's a higher risk because you now have 50, 100, 200 sellers that if the builder leaves, does something wrong, fails to disclose something, defects, you now have 200 plaintiffs coming at you as an exclusive. I'm not saying don't do it. If I was an agent and I can get it, I might do it myself. But you have to understand that's a higher risk. Maybe you wouldn't accept dual agency in that kind of an environment.
Intermediary with no appointment. That's the worst.
Intermediary with no appointment is terrible.
We see suit on those all the time, folks. That's the one area where you're trying to represent a seller and you also represent the buyer and you do no appointment. That is absolutely insane. It is. You can't serve two masters. You can't give advice.
Yep.
You can't give counsel. So what are you doing?
Craig, we don't even allow it.
Yeah. Good.
And the other, and then more along the lines of high risk. Are you the client's fifth real estate agent? Right? And all of you think you're super person, oh, I can work with them. It's like, you know, I can fix them. No, it's not you, it's them.
It's like a fake marriage.
Those are high risk, high litigious. You know, one of the things I'll always pose to my agents, and I pose it to the leaders of the group too, when was the last time you said no to a client? Do you interview them as much as they interview you?
Yes.
Do your expectations match? That is that high.
That is great advice. You guys, thank you. How were these guys? Is anybody so scared that they're going to go out and get another job? Put your hands down. Now, Craig, 4 years ago, I just came in 4.5 years ago, and Craig said, hey, I've got this idea. There's this Marilyn O'Neill lady, and I knew who she was, and I want to bring her in, and she would be the person agents can call. Who in here has called Marilyn O'Neill before? Now,
okay, no, wait, I have a better question. Who has sold a home in their career and not called Marilyn so far? Because you're the ones I'm worried about.
And Marilyn is the kind of person where she doesn't make you feel bad about calling her. She doesn't ridicule. She wants you to call her 50 times on the same question. All right. So I committed to you guys. You guys came in here. You sat in here. Everybody behaved. I'm very proud of you. All right. I'm going to read off the question, but you guys have to answer it. All right? May a KW Memorial Associate represent themselves as a seller on any property? No. Okay. What should you do? One person said. Another agent. You work out the commission with. Guys, I just closed on my house last week. Oscar Hernandez handled it. I bought him dinner. Okay. Now I'm not saying that's always going to work. But you can certainly
you did it for free.
You can certainly have a reciprocity with them that maybe you sell their house and you get ready to do it. Don't sell your own. It's a huge, huge risk.
I mean,
5 times greater.
And carry out the duties as well, not just put the name